Hey everybody, welcome to Q Plus EDU. We are super thrilled to have you here today. My name is Frederick, my pronouns are they, them, and I am Out Youth's Texas Gender and Sexuality Alliance Network Coordinator. I will be recording today's session and it should be up on our website within a week or two.
Awesome. Hi everyone, I'm E. I use they, them pronouns. I am the founder of Q Plus EDU. I'll be here mostly to moderate the chat, so if you have questions or comments or anything, feel free to drop those. Also, if there are any resources or links mentioned in the chat, I will put those, mentioned throughout this presentation. I will put those in the chat and they will also be posted on our website after this. So with that, I will turn it over to Shanae.
Hey, all right, so I am going to share my screen. So today, y'all, we are going to be talking about non-monogamy and specifically the conversations that occur in non-monogamy. And screen sharing is there and happen. Cool. And thank you. From the beginning. Cool. Okay. So we're going to be talking about the conversations that occur in non-monogamy. And the title of this is Vet Check Split. And those are the three conversations, just from my experience as a polyamorous queer person and from the experiences of those around me whom I've talked to. You know, these are the three most common conversations that are happening. But just hold your horses. We'll get right to that. Also, my pronouns are they, them. But you know, there's a whole slide where I'm supposed to do the things. So hey y'all, I am Shanae Adams. I've been a sexuality educator for 10 years now, definitely since I was in undergrad. I joined an organization called SHAPE at the University of Missouri, which stands for Sexual Health Advocate Peer Education. And they taught us how to present sexuality health information. They taught us classroom skills. And I really fell in love with education, and every single job or thing I've done for capitalism since then has been involved in the realm of sex and sexuality. I also am a licensed professional counselor candidate. So what that means is that I have my master's in clinical counseling and I am a licensed counselor candidate in the state of Colorado. All that basically means is that I am working on getting my hours for my full license, but I own a private practice called My Therapeutic Services. My is spelled M-A-I. It stands for Manifest, Affirm, and Intent. And I do therapy and I also do coaching, and I bring a lot of kind of holistic and indigenized forms of therapy in my practice. And basically what that means is, you know, a lot of what they teach us about therapy and what we learn in school was created from white men for white men. And those models don't necessarily fit in the queer community, the POC community, the Black community. So I really enjoy looking at, you know, the forms of talk therapy, the forms of exploration, guided meditations and visualizations, and bringing those into the therapy session to really help my clients explore and gain a lot of clarity. I also do a lot of somatic work. So I'm really interested in how the feelings of your body can inform the logic that's happening in your mind, and allowing for, you know, a bridge of sorts for communication and that knowledge passing to occur between the two, so that way you can have more of a full holistic body experience in that regard. Lastly, I own a sex positive collaborative here in Denver, Colorado. And basically that means that I have a community resource center. The name of it is the Chrysalis House. And if you think about it, chrysalises are the little cocoons that caterpillars go into before they become butterflies. And the process of becoming a butterfly for that caterpillar basically means that they have to turn into this like gelatinous goop, and then they come out as this new being, and they can't even see their wings. So at the Chrysalis House, we like to say that this is a safe space for you to become goop, and this is also a place to be able to return, for us to be able to affirm, you know, your wings and the things that you're doing and the accomplishments that you've made, and move in that regard. And our target demographics at the Chrysalis House are QTPOC people and sex workers. So we do a lot of work in mental health and sex work, and then we're also, my co-founder does a lot of work in sex work decriminalization. And all of that information and all of the different services and things that I do, you'll be able to find my contact information on the very last slide. So kind of all of this to say that I exist in this bubble of sex and sexuality, with what I like to say little sprinkles of trauma, because, you know, trauma sometimes really impacts the field of sex and sexuality, and definitely in sex and sex work. So that has been my passion and how I show up and I serve my community, and I really kind of like navigate the areas and the playing fields that I exist in. So all that to say, like, this is my background and this is where I'm coming from. So today we're here to talk about ethical non-monogamy. And the first thing that we have to do with that is really break down what ethical non-monogamy means. And I want to start with that first word, which is ethical. So there is some kind of ethics, or there's some kind of guideline or path that has to exist in this parameter. There's some kind of moral code, as it were, that a lot of people really have to have an understanding of and ground in themselves before they're able to pursue non-monogamy. The ethical point also comes in how you navigate that non-monogamy in situations with partners, and how, you know, giving people the opportunity to consent to being in this relationship dynamic with you is extremely important, and having those open conversations. And then we transition into that other word, which is non-monogamy. So it's not operating in a monogamous landscape, and kind of moving away from this concept or this idea that there is only one partner that you have that you turn to for your emotional, mental, sexual support and connection, and moving out of that. So all of that to say that ethical non-monogamy is basically an umbrella term, and there are several things that fall under that umbrella term, and some of them are listed here. The first one is stranger sex. So this is the concept of having sex with people whom you don't know, and that being, you know, the kind of relationship dynamic that you're existing in this kind of playing field. There's also, you know, the random hookup. So people who are really interested in being able to have sex or connect with whomever it is that they're interested in connecting with. There's also the concept of swinging. Swinging typically refers to a couple, and oftentimes it is a heterosexual couple that gets a lot of enjoyment from engaging in sexual activity with another couple. So there might be like some wife swapping or some husband swapping or something in that regards, but it's a type of non-monogamy that takes place between couples. Things like friends with benefits falls under the umbrella of ethical non-monogamy, in the sense that, you know, you can have these barriers around this friendship where you're able to engage in sex and sexual activity. And as we look at relationship anarchy and polyamory, there's this concept that, you know, ethical non-monogamy has to do a lot with sex and a lot about the act of engaging in intimate sex with a person. But that's not all that it's kind of wrapped up with, because if we look at relationship anarchy, it's kind of this idea. And if you ask a relationship anarchist, if you ask 10 relationship anarchists, I'm sure they'll give you 10 different definitions. But in general, relationship anarchy is kind of this concept that you're able to go out and express and do what you feel and how you feel. Maybe there's a hierarchy in relationships. So maybe, you know, this is your person, and this person, you know, feelings are put before this person, those feelings are put before that person. Even in relationship anarchy, there's this concept that the structure of how relationships are supposed to exist and how society tells us that we have to show up in relationships is able to be skewed. So maybe you can really designate, yo, this is my sexual person that I go to for that kind of intimate connection. This is a person who I go to for like an emotional connection. This is a person who I experience a lot of like financial intimacy with. Relationship anarchy is kind of like a deconstructed cookie, I like to think of, where society says you have to eat the cookie whole with, you know, the 2 chocolate pieces and the cream filling in the middle, whereas like a relationship anarchist may have like a whole cookie over here, and crumbled cookie over here, spread cream over this thing. You know, they're not adhering to society's definition of relationships. And then there is polyamory, which is, when we talk about ethical non-monogamy, is a term that I feel like most is conjured for people. And we're definitely going to get into polyamory in itself more. But I do want to mention that polyamory is not polygamy or polyandry. And polygamy and polyandry is having multiple husbands are having multiple wives. And a lot of that is really linked in religion, and really linked in, you know, how you can contribute to the creation of children and the continuance of culture and the perpetuance of the human race by having several partners who you are religiously bonded to under the guise of your religious belief, your spiritual beliefs, the gods that you believe in, or the spiritual contents in which that you hold. So all of that to say that this umbrella covers a lot, and I want to check in with y'all and see if there's any questions or any immediate things that are coming up as we discuss this umbrella term of ethical non-monogamy. Okie dokie. Okay. So as we continue on,
It looks like there's a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. But someone said, what would someone call themselves if they are not poly but are open to these other things?
So that's a really great question. So a person who doesn't identify as polyamorous but open to these other terms would could use that umbrella term of like, I engage in ethical non-monogamy. You know, I am a non-monogamous, or even like expressing to their partners or the people in their lives that I am not a monogamous person in that regard. So it's a really great question. No, I can't see the chats. I see like a Q&A box, but I don't see a chat box in its shelf.
Okay.
Oh wait, yes I do. I found it.
Cool.
I'll tuck it in a corner somewhere. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's a great question. Anything else coming up for people? Oh, okay. So we do all this to talk about, you know, what is ethical non-monogamy, and it is this umbrella term. So then we get very specific into what ethical non-monogamy is not. And this goes again to that concept of ethics, to that concept of having, you know, a guide or a principle, a set of modalities, a set of morals, however you want to think about it, having the sense of belief. And really what it comes down to at the end of the day is if the people whom you're engaging in multiple relationships with don't know that you're not monogamous, I would say that that is an unethical form of non-monogamy. So if you're engaging in several relationships with several people, and these people think that, you know, they are your primary partner, and if they're moving and existing in the world without this information, so that way they can make an informed decision about whether or not they want to engage in this structure of relationship, that makes your non-monogamy unethical. Some other things that may contribute to an unethical form of non-monogamy, or even just that term in general, is oftentimes people say that non-monogamy is cheating. And this is what happens when we look at non-monogamy through a monogamous landscape. And we're going to dig more into, you know, how monogamy exists in the world and versus how that plays with polyamory in specifics. But when we talk about this concept of being ethically non-monogamous, this idea that if you have multiple partners, you're just cheating on all of your partners, we really have to get into the semantics of what it means to cheat. And for a lot of people, just if you ask, you know, maybe a random person on the street, that definition will be like, well, if you are turning to another person for your sexual connection, for your sexual intimacy or your emotional intimacy or your mental intimacy, like that is a form of cheating. And oftentimes this notion of cheating is unspoken. You know, there's this concept that everybody is just existing with this exact same framework. And one of the things that I do as a therapist and as a coach with people who are exploring this concept of non-monogamy is really sitting down and looking at what cheating in itself means. Because even though we're holding on to this fact that, you know, you're seeking someone else for your intimacies, ultimately what it comes down to is like a break of contract that you have. So if there's this idea that, you know, I as your partner am supposed to be the person that you turn to for emotional or sexual intimacy, and you turn to somebody else, that's a breach of contract. in that regards, as opposed to this unspoken umbrella landscape that cheating is, relying on more people than your primary person. Other forms of non-monogamy also show up in, unfortunately, in abusive situations, and whether that be like a physical, emotional, sexual, psychosocial, financial kind of abuse, is this idea that like, well, you only serve this one purpose for me, so fall in line with that purpose, or don't, be a part of this team or play in the game. Are also some things that, we have to navigate when we're looking at the ethics that is arising in people's non-monogamy in that regard. Okay. So when we get more into it, we want to explore like, how does monogamy and polyamory compare? So again, monogamy is this concept that you have one person that is to be the source of your love, your affection, and your emotional capacity. There's this one human that you're supposed to turn to for your intimate connections and your intimate relationships. And the thing about monogamy is that it is very much rooted in religion. And when we look at the development of relationships that humans are having on the timeline of humanity, yeah, that makes sense. Monogamy is actually a very new development on that timeline. So in several ancient civilizations, whether that be in Egypt or China or other parts of Asia, what we were seeing is more relationships kind of rooted in polyamory and polygamy. And I see this question pop up, and I'll swing back around to that. So we see this kind of concept that, the strongest hunter in the tribe is able to have multiple partners and multiple wives because they're able to supply those multiple partners and multiple wives. And when we start looking at Christianity and its rise in the West and its rise over the world, there becomes this concept that, marriage is supposed to be this thing that happens between one man and one woman. And it's really concerned with reproduction. You have to have one man with one woman because we have to be able to have children, and we have to be able to continue the perpetuation of the human race. And definitely rooted in it being, close to godliness. And sometimes when we discuss about how the roots of monogamy exist, we forget some of the other relationships that show up for the Christian Bible in particular, of how, a person who engages in non-consensual sex or rape with a person is like now married. So that kind of gives it of like, when we're looking at monogamy and the reasons why monogamy is existing, also looking at the other things written in that text is kind of like a pause to go like, We also think about the societal impact that monogamy has. So it's very much this idea that the relationships that you're having in which you are relying on one person are the only valid kinds of relationships. Again, those are the only kind of relationships in which you're going to be able to use someone's insurance or file a joint tax or be able to get like those societal benefits that comes with being in a monogamous relationship. And that's frankly because, if you have two partners, you can't put both of those partners on your insurance. Whomever is on your insurance, or even thinking about like your emergency contact that comes up if you're in the hospital, you then have to have and designate that this is the person for that. And because you are designating them as that person, this is the relationship that has the most value and is the most respected in society. Again, when we think about monogamy, there's a lot of unspoken rules. There's this concept that monogamy is quote unquote normal, and it is the way that, humans are supposed to exist. And because that's how we're supposed to exist, everybody has a working definition about how that should show up, and it kind of already has a working standpoint of what the expectations are to be in this form of relationship. And if we look at the media and the images that are put out to us, all we really see are monogamous relationships. So what we're taught is this script and these tools about how to exist in the lens of monogamy, and that there's no other form of relationship that has as much value in that sense. So I'm jumping over into the chat here, and I see, so the definition of cheating in ethical non-monogamy is a breach of contract. So I would say that the definition of cheating in general should be a breach of contract. Because again, if you ask people, what is cheating, they're gonna say, well, if you cheat on me, that means that you have sex with somebody else. So it's the action of me and you have an agreement that I am the only person whom you are supposed to have sex with. And if you have sex with someone else, you breached that contract. You have crossed that boundary that we have set. In terms of like saying that it's exploring it more as a breach of contract, as opposed to just like a standard working definition that just like everybody should know. And that's when we start to get into like the weeds of things of like, okay, so if I like something on Instagram, is that cheating? If I have a flirty conversation with someone else, is that cheating? If I go on vacation and you're 500 miles away from me and I engage in, an emotional intimacy with a person, is that cheating? So if we move cheating out of this kind of concept that everybody should know the working definition of, and really establishing that these are contracts that we are upholding with our partners, and if you breach that contract, then that can be like a working form of cheating. That's more what I was getting towards. Does that answer your question? And is there any other questions concerning monogamy while I got the chat box open? Okay, so do you think people are born to be monogamous or non-monogamous, or is it something more that you choose? Great question. And this pops up more, I think, in like polyamory, because we can make the argument that monogamy is not like only a lifestyle, but also like a sexual orientation. The same way that people speak about how, polyamory is their sexual orientation and not just like the lifestyle that they're living. So to be 100% honest, I think that, people have different experiences, and I definitely see how both of these terms can exist both as a lifestyle and as a sexual orientation. One of the things that I really like to talk about in the groups that I work with women in particular, is this concept of dating multiple people. Now, because you're dating multiple people at once doesn't mean that you have to be having sex with all of these people unless you want to. I ain't gonna tell you how to live your life, make an informed decision. But when you date multiple people at a time, in particular with like the experience of like operating with like cishet men, and in particular, a lot of the work that I do with cishet women concerns cishet Black men, being able to know how it feels to be in a relationship in which you're feeling served, can very much highlight to you whether or not you want to be in a relationship with this person. Also being able to identify, the traits that you see in a partner that you really enjoy and the traits that you see in a partner that you don't enjoy becomes more clear if you're dating multiple people at one time. So I would say, again, that might be like a lifestyle choice that a person might make, is to engage in ethical non-monogamy. And let multiple partners know that, hey, I'm dating multiple people at this time, and I'm learning more about what I need in a relationship and learning more about, what I would like in a partner in a relationship. And in particular, that can really cause a fire or a motivation for some partners to be like, yo, if I want this person to be my person, if I want to engage in a monogamous situation with this person, I have to show up to the best of my abilities. We don't want you to show up and perform, because at some point that act is going to drop and then you're going to find yourself in that same point. But I need to show up in a way that says to this person whom I want to be in a relationship with that I am a person which is going to, provide them the support and the connection it is that they're looking for in that relationship. And at the same time, I have clients who believe that they're polyamorous for their mental health, so that it is super important for them to be able to have several people in their circle that they can turn to for the affirmation, for the release, and just the community that can come about for people. I also sometimes talk about like polyamory or polyandry or polygamy as being, you know, as like a financial choice. Like, do you know how expensive rent is? This is not the kind of fiscal era to be monogamous. You know, it might best serve some people when they think about, you know, the lifestyle that they want to live and how they want to be accustomed to this life, that it might be a lot more feasible for them to reach those things if there are several people participating. Excuse me. So, you know, it can definitely, I feel like I resonate with people who view it as a sexual orientation, and also resonate with people who are making, like, you know, the conscious decision to be able to do that. Also, in that same regard, I think it's important to mention that if you do identify as a person who is non-monogamous and you find yourself like with only one partner at a time, there's always that thought of like, well, damn, I only got one partner. So am I monogamous now? Or what does that mean? I liken it to people who are bisexual. You know, just because you're in a queer appearing or heterosexual appearing relationship because you have that one partner doesn't mean that you've stopped being bisexual, kind of thing. Great question. Okay, so let's look at how polyamory plays in this landscape. So when we break down the word polyamory, it comes from the root word poly, meaning many, and amor, meaning love. So basically, polyamorous people are interested in having loving, connected relationships. And relationship, I feel like sometimes gets like a very heavy connotation, but you have several relationships in your life. You and I are in a relationship right now, in that like I am providing information to you. You and your friends are in relationship. You and your family are in relationship. So in all honesty, we are all polyamorous because we all have many loving relationships. However, you know, there's that heavy connotation that gets put on relationship, and that has to then designate to like some kind of like intimate connection. And oftentimes for a lot of people, it connotates to like a sexual connection. But again, polyamory is not always sexual. So maybe you have, you know, these intimacies, and being intimate is just speaking about like the deep relationship that you have with someone. You know, maybe this is a person whom you know that you feel safe with to be able to express these feelings with, or on the several forms of intimacy, whether that be like a touch intimacy, having a cuddle buddy, or having a platonic friend who you cuddle with, or even having friends who are very touchy. You know, that is a intimate connection that you're having. Financial intimacy, especially if you have a financial planner or a banker or somebody that you talk to money about, that is a form of intimacy. Mental and emotional intimacy, being able to show up and be vulnerable in a particular space with this particular person. So again, polyamory looks different for different people. So I can't tell you how your polyamory might look, or how the next person polyamory might look, because there's no standard playbook. You know, we don't see a lot of examples of polyamory in the media, and the examples that we do usually see end up being like one male and two women. And typically, like in regards to this kind of setup, those women aren't allowed to have other men in their life. You know, they can have as many other women as they want, but there's one man, he wants to be the only man that's in that relationship. And when we explore that, that's when we come to polyamory is most concerned with being in relationships that serve you. So being in relationships that provide you the things that you need. And I also feel like it takes a lot of stress and a lot of the anxiety that can come with being in a monogamous relationship, because just like fathoming that I am this person's person. Whenever this person needs something, I am the person that this person comes to. I am solely responsible for holding this person and their needs and their intimacies. And that can be very overwhelming and very anxiety inducing. And engaging in polyamory, you're able to spread that out, whereas like, you are my person for this, you are my person for that. Communication is absolutely key in these relationships, because humans' emotions arise and exist. people oftentimes think that polyamorous people don't get jealous, or polyamorous people, you know, don't feel anger or sadness. And that's not true. Humans have emotions. What I would say for a lot of people who engage in ethical non-monogamy and people who engage in polyamory is that they have a certain level of emotional intelligence in which they are able to acknowledge, I'm feeling jealous, and I'm feeling jealous because I'm comparing myself to this other person, or I'm feeling jealous because I wonder how my partner feels when they're with this other person. And they allow themselves to really explore those emotions. And furthermore, they don't let those emotions rule their behavior. So when we talk about jealousy in particular in monogamous culture, there's this aspect that if your partner doesn't get jealous, they don't care about you. We see this a lot as a trope in movies where the girl's talking to some other guy, so now the guy has to come over and be like, hey, this is my girl, don't be talking to my girl. And now the girl knows that her guy really cares about her because he got jealous. Again, monogamy is really based in like a heteronormativism. Yeah, and how that jealousy is the only way that you can prove your love, that you have to fight. I think it also has to do a lot with like toxic masculinity and the ownership of a person, whereas like, this is my partner, this is my woman, don't talk to my partner, don't talk to my woman, you know, they're following me in what I'm setting and what I'm doing. And engaging in a non-monogamous relationship really means having emotional intelligence to explore what's coming up for you and exploring what the root of that is. So I see this question that says, what is the best way in your experience to open the conversation of non-monogamy with people who have been traditionally monogamous? So we're going to explore that in the vet section, in the vet conversation that we're coming up with. So thank you for that question, because that was a great question. Not sure if you were able to see this, but oh, okay, yeah, I did see that in the chat. Any other questions while I have this chat box open? Okay. So now that we kind of have this like overview and understanding, we start asking like, is non-monogamy a kind of relationship that is for you or is going to fit for you? And this isn't an exhaustive list of questions. You know, I don't want you to sit and reflect on these questions and be like, well, damn, I had no on the majority of these. I guess it's not for me. Because non-monogamy is some things that people have to come to on their own accord. Some people, again, view this as their sexual orientation and they're just naturally inclined and leaning to it. And some people are exploring it as a lifestyle for whatever goal that may be, whether that's trying to learn more about themselves or learn more about the relationships and the partners that they're interested in having with themselves. So when I have clients who come who talk to me about exploring non-monogamy, I always like to ask, like, so are you passionate about building relationships or making connections? And I feel like for a lot of people, the first thing that comes up is like networking. And they're like, yeah, I'm a great networker, I got all the jobs. But it's like, are you interested in, for polyamory in particular, making these intentional connections with people? A next question is, do you have a clear vision and can you communicate it? So some people have this idea when they think about like how their life looks, that they have, you know, these multiple partners. And even if there's like children involved, now there's multiple humans in this same space to care for this child and to also allow you to have the self-care for yourself. So not only do you have a clear vision, but can you communicate? Are you willing and open to communicate about what you want and what you're thinking and what you're feeling? Are you willing to mess up in your communication and now have to re-show up and reprocess and re-engage in these conversations? Another thing is, do you enjoy sharing? And when I think about this, I think about the term compersion. And compersion is a feeling you experience from a person whom you really care about, receiving joy or receiving pleasure. So compersion might be you being really excited for your friend that's gotten a new job or graduated or ordered their Dunkin' Donuts like a pro. Like feeling really happy for this other person. Compersion and non-monogamy looks like, are you really happy that, you know, your partner has this other partner that they're able to turn to for whatever kind of intimacy it is they've designated this partner for? Are you willing to handle challenging emotions? Because again, there's the myth that people in non-monogamous relationships don't experience jealousy or anger or hesitation or self-esteem or self-confidence dissonance. And that's not true, because again, humans are humans and human emotions exist. What I would say about people who engage in non-monogamy is that they have an emotional intelligence that allows them not to move based on their emotions. And then also, like, do you acknowledge that your needs could be better served by the many as opposed to one? And do you acknowledge that maybe like you are not interested in being, excuse me, you are not interested in being one person's everything, that you don't want to have to hold all of the things for this other human? So again, not an exhaustive list, but definitely something to think about and explore as you're grappling and understanding with like what non-monogamy may look like for you. Okay, so when we think about the conversations that are happening in non-monogamy, from what I've seen, there are 3 conversations that happen a lot. And the first conversation, those conversations are vet. So the vetting conversation, where you're identifying a person or persons whom you might want to engage in a relationship with. The check conversation, so the check-ins that you're going to have with your partner. And check-ins are good for any kind of relationship, whether you're in a monogamous relationship, with your friends, with your family, having intentional opportunities to sit and talk about your relationship. And the split conversation, which is the conversation that occurs when you're deciding to dissolve this relationship and go your separate ways. So vetting, deciding whether or not you want to engage in a relationship. So some things that you might want to explore with yourself is, what do you want out of this relationship? You know, you're here with this person. Are you just really interested in having a purely physical connection? You know, you just want to have this hookup right then and there, and it's cool with you if you don't ever see this person again. Are you really interested in this person's heart and really interested in existing in this person's universe and their atmosphere? And that is something interesting for you. Are you looking for, you know, your partners who you're going to build generational wealth with, so y'all can buy 20 acres in the country and build your commune and live out your lives in like the joy of like what Khalees is doing with your garden and your music and just doing it big? What is it that you want out of a relationship? Next is, what is your capacity for partners? And a lot of these are really exploring polyamory in particular, but how many humans do you feel like you have capacity to hold on to? And what role will these humans play for you? This can also look for like people who are like in a swinger relationship, you know, like how many couples are you willing to swing with? Even in regards to like how many people are you willing to hook up with? How many strangers are you willing to engage in that physical intimacy with? And lastly, what is your plan for navigating hard feelings? Because hard feelings happen. Hard feelings will happen. If I can't guarantee you anything else, I can tell you that relationships are work and that feelings come up, and you have to have a plan for those feelings. And if your plan is to wing it, Godspeed. So having a plan for navigating those feelings is super duper important. Some questions for others. So when I think about vetting, I think about this like in a date setting. You know, you swiped right on Tinder, or you locked eyes across the dance floor, or you snuck into the wrong Zoom and now you're meeting this person. So the same kind of like new relationship questions that you would engage in are also the same kind of questions that would come up in a new relationship setting. So that whole like, what's your favorite color? Tell me about your childhood. How do you feel about Black Lives Matter? What's your view on abortion? Those are the new relationship conversations that I be having. But some other things that you might want to question for others is like, what do you want from this relationship? And what style of non-monogamy do you practice? And even if you practice a style of non-monogamy. So oftentimes what comes up is that I meet people who feel like because they're non-monogamous and they keep running into people who are only monogamous, that either they're doing their non-monogamy wrong or they're just not destined to be in a relationship at all, because they can't find a non-monogamous person and their monogamous person is very secure in their monogamy. And there's not a single script that I can provide to you in navigating that. I think that it's really important to ask questions about, what does monogamy do for you? What does non-monogamy do for me? What are you really interested in and looking for in a relationship? What am I really interested in looking for in a relationship? I can say that as a non-monogamous person, I have been in relationships with monogamous people. And sometimes those monogamous relationships, sometimes that monogamous partner of mine and our relationship has been able to be really successful. And sometimes, me and that person have had to part ways because my non-monogamy is not a thing that they can handle. And that's valid. How I live my life and how I present myself then gives that person the informed consent and the informed information that they need to make a decision about whether or not they want to engage in this style of relationship. So I think that if you're approaching as a non-monogamous person trying to be in a relationship with a monogamous person, there's a lot of patience and a lot of grace that needs to exist in that space. You also have to kind of conflict with, sometimes people have toxic monogamous ideas, and those are about like the ownership and the jealousy and this feeling that if you have other partners, I'm now in competition with those other people and I have to find some way to like win the prize, when it's like, well, you've already won because you already have that person, kind of thing. Now you're just talking yourself out of having that person. Another important thing to explore is how many partners do you have, and what is your capacity for partners? If I enter into this dynamic with you, I oftentimes think about like, how much attention are you able to give? Because I'm not high maintenance, but I do require a certain level of attention, and I want to make sure that I get my attention. Exploring that if those relationships are sexual, and if they are sexual, how are you protecting yourself? Definitely with the pandemic that's occurring right now, what we know is that the safest person to have sex with is yourself. The second safest person to have sex with is a person whom you are solely having sex with, because when you're bringing in multiple people with multiple bodies, I used to hate how they said, when you have sex with someone, you're having sex with all the people that they've had sex with, but like low-key, that's not wrong. So how are you protecting yourself? What does the protective or contraceptive methods look like? What is your testing, getting STD tested schedule look like? Another thing to explore in vetting is, what are or do you have any kinks? I would definitely say that some people view non-monogamy as a kink that they have, as a thing that they like to do and they exist in their lifestyle. And it's like a question of like, what is your kink? I know for me, and then that gives you like the opportunity to talk about red flags and green flags, and if there's any hard yeses or hard nos. So like me personally, I can't be in a relationship with a person whose kink is age play, if they're interested in being like a little, because that's just a barrier for me. I like everybody to be the age that they are, but that's a conversation that you want to have up front, so that way you're not pouring energy into a relationship and then feeling like that energy is just like dissipating. Another question is, how long have you been in the lifestyle? The more that you do it, not necessarily the easier it becomes, but the more tools you have in your toolkit to be able to navigate is what I say happens. So the more you engage in this lifestyle or in this sexual orientation. And then again, what are your views on Black Lives Matter and abortion and, all those kind of new relationship questions. So I'm in the chat box. It says, what is an example of a plan to navigate hard feelings? Great question. So if we look at jealousy in particular, coming up with first acknowledging to yourself that jealousy is a very strong emotion that you feel often, or you feel a lot, or that it's just a very powerful emotion. So it's acknowledging that jealousy is something that comes up for you. So a plan to navigate that hard feeling might be like, so when I feel jealous, what am I going to do? And coming up with a step-by-step plan. So that might be like, okay, so as soon as I feel jealous, the first thing I'm going to do is acknowledge that this is the feeling that I'm feeling. I'm going to acknowledge that right now, in this moment, I feel jealous because you are getting dressed to go on a date, and I feel jealous, and be very clear and specific. Like, you getting dressed to go on a date makes me feel jealous because I want to go to that place, or I feel like I don't ever get to go on fancy fun dates, or I'm worried that you like this person more, or you're going to have more fun on this date with this person than you've ever had on a date with me. So really acknowledging the feeling and what's coming up for you in the feeling. The next step in that plan is to decide whether or not that is true, whether or not the feelings and the root that you're experiencing is true. So if I feel jealous because you're getting ready to go on this date and I feel like I'll never get to go on fun dates, stopping and saying, okay, do I get to go on fun dates? And maybe you're like, yeah, we went and played laser tag last week and that was fun as hell. So that's not true. I do get to go on fun dates. I'm just, sitting in this moment right now, but these feelings aren't true. And because these feelings aren't true, I'm going to breathe and let them dissipate, or I'm going to distract myself and let them dissipate, or I'm going to journal and dig into them and sit with them and let them dissipate. Whereas a person who may not have, that level of emotional intelligence may say, I feel jealous, or say, I feel angry, so I'm going to start a fight with you, so now you don't go. So something in that regards. Very, very good question. Okay. So things to keep in mind when you're engaging in the vetting conversation is that every conversation is going to be different, because humans are different, and there's no one playbook that I can give you about how to. I don't have a playbook for humans. This is why I became a therapist, because they're fascinating creatures and there's no rule book for them. So every conversation will be different. Another thing to keep in mind is you can always ask more questions. So let's say y'all met up at that coffee shop, you went to dinner, they came over to Netflix and chill, you talked, they left, and as soon as they walked out the room, you got hit with 20 more questions. You can always ask more questions. There's definitely a way to ask more questions, but you can always ask more questions. This is not a one and done conversation. No conversation is a one and done conversation. You can always get into it more. Again, the more you do it, the easier it is. Just like the more that you are vulnerable, the more that you put yourself out there, the more that you engage in that level of emotional intelligence, the easier it is to do, or the more tools that you'll have to be able to navigate the points where difficulties arrive. Other things to keep in mind is the motivation of the conversation will impact the conversation. So if you met this human in a nightclub in a not COVID world, and you decide that you want to just have sex with this person, that vetting conversation may look like, yo, I'm just trying to get it in. You want to go to the bathroom? When's the last time you got tested? Tell me about, your sexual history, life. I'm cool, you cool, let's get it in. Whereas I really like you and I would like to exist in your universe for a little bit. Those motivations are going to change that conversation. And again, this conversation is not the only one that you can have. This is not the end all be all. This conversation is definitely ongoing. Any questions about the vetting conversation? Okay, great. And thank y'all for bearing with me. Allergies are hard. Okay. Question. Another question. Can you talk about vetting someone's past partners? Great question. So this comes up with, especially in the world of polyamory and even in the BDSM lifestyle, there's this idea of do you have any references? And I think that if you all exist in the same community, definitely I know that sometimes queer circles be hella small. So if you feel so inclined to go up to a person and be like, hey, I'm thinking about getting in a relationship with Alex. I know you were in a relationship with Alex. Can you tell me about your relationship with Alex? If you feel like that's going to be helpful, that's something to think about. But I think an even better question would be why do you think that this is going to be helpful? Why is how Alex showed up in this previous relationship informing how you feel like they're going to show up in this relationship. Because what I always think about is when people tell you who they are, believe them. You know, when people show up in the same patterns, believe them. And I feel like it takes a lot of the energetic and the mental and emotional labor that A, you're requesting from another person, and B, that you then have to put in yourself into like trying to explore this person. In terms of like the BDSM and kink community, I think that references can serve as an importance because, you know, you want to make sure that this is a person who has a knowledge base and a foundation and like believes in consent. And more often than not, in that kind of situation, in that community will push out people who don't have those values. So then again, exploring whether or not you want to talk to someone about their experience, that opens the book for you. And there's also like several websites that exist where you can write about the experience that you've had with someone anonymously. So that way, if a person's thinking about like booking a pro dom, for example, or trying to get like a girlfriend experience, for example, you can read about like their reviews of service. But it's definitely a both and for when you're reaching out to exploring someone's relationships with past partners, because humans are different and humans will perpetuate patterns if you are looking for them. But great question. Okay, so let's talk about let's talk about the check-in conversation. So a check-in is a dedicated moment to talk about your relationship. So some questions that you might want to ask before you engage in a check-in is, how are you showing up in the relationship? Do you notice that you feel particularly calm and happy about being able to interact with this person? Or do you feel maybe not so positive feelings about that? How are you feeling about your level of participation in this relationship? Do you feel like you're in this kind of like parent-child relationship where you're always having to talk down to your partner and you feel like you always have to direct your partner? Or do you feel like you're in a partnership and you feel like, you know, both of you are working towards the same goal and you're on the same chapter, on the same page, what have you? What do you need that you aren't getting in your relationship? And this is another reason why, you know, dating multiple people at one time can really help to illuminate. Because if you're like, yo, I'm looking for gender neutral name, Taylor is able to really make me feel loved and make me feel safe, and then I engage with Max and I just really feel like irritated and annoyed. You know, you can really navigate that, you know, maybe this person isn't the kind of person I want to be in a relationship with, or maybe this relationship isn't serving me. And then what do you feel that you contribute to the relationship? And that depends on like if it's a relationship in which your contribution is one that you feel like is really needed. Are you showing up in that intimate way that your partner is requesting of you? Are you showing up in a way that feels really good and really supported to you? So really doing some reflection so you have something to bring to the table for the conversation. Questions for others might be, so I always tell people that you want to schedule your check-ins. Yo, we meet in the third Tuesday of the month and we meet at Panera at 2:00, and that's our check-in time. We're gonna have, and scheduling it like a business meeting, putting it in your calendar may be a really useful or helpful thing for people if they feel like they're not getting the opportunity to check in a lot. And kind of like even putting together an agenda. Like this is like having a very intentional conversation. So you might have your questions laid out. Like, so how is this relationship going for you? And I would challenge you to challenge yourself and to challenge your partners to be vulnerable and be honest. If I ask you how this relationship is going for you and you just say, fine, that doesn't tell me anything. You know, we want clear examples. We want reflections. We want vulnerability and those emotional risks to be taken. So that way you can show up to the best of your ability in this relationship. Another thing to do is going to be like, another thing that could be useful is roses and thorns. So what are the good things about our relationship? Like you would at a work icebreaker meeting, you know, what are two things that are going really well and one thing that's not going as good? Because these check-ins are not an opportunity for you just to like come at your partners, for you just to like read your partners for filth in this moment. You know, you definitely want to talk about the positives in the relationship as well. Some other things about what are you getting that you don't need, and it's like, yo, I could really like not use those office quotes all the time. Like if we could like if we could tone that down a little bit, or if, you know, I really don't need all the tea bags that you leave around the house, you know. And what do you need that you're not getting? You know, I think about this in terms of like your love languages. And I know for me, touch is one of my highest love languages. Whereas like words of affirmation is not high on that list for me. So it's like, you know, I really hear you talk about how awesome I am and like how much you love me, but you don't really touch me, and that doesn't make me feel like loved. So I wouldn't notice if the affirmations decreased, but I do notice that, you know, I'm not receiving that same level of touch. Another thing to explore is, what are the goals for this relationship? What do you want to be doing in a month, in a year, in 5 years? You know, and when I talk about the goals, I think it's really important that we don't get sucked into the relationship escalator where it's like, yo, we're ready to take the next step or move to the next level, because what does that mean? So that's why it's really good to like flesh out the goals, where it's like, you know, as we continue this relationship, I think that exploring the idea of living together might be a really interesting goal. Or as we work on our relationship, I think we really need to work on how we argue. Like that might be a goal. So really exploring where you would like to be in your relationship. Some things to keep in mind. The check-in is a time to air grievances, but that does not mean that every time your partner does something wrong that you take note of it so you can bring it to the table at this meeting. It's not going to be useful for you to be like, well, on August 12th at 2 p.m. you said this, and then on August 4th at 3 p.m. you left your socks here, and then you did this and you did that. That's not going to be a helpful check-in. It's important to address things in the moment. So if it's like, yo, you keep leaving your socks on the ground, as soon as you see them socks, you say, hey, you keep leaving your socks on the ground. And then when you have that dedicated moment for your conversation, it's like, I could really use you not leaving your socks on the ground, kind of thing. So it's not a time to read your partner for filth. You also want to schedule this moment and make it an intentional space, because again, we're asking for you to show up and be vulnerable. We're asking for you to take emotional risks. And there's some self-reflection that can occur for you. And what do I need for this space to be a space safe enough for me to be able to engage in these emotional risks? Some other things to keep in mind is that one time a month is like typically what I recommend, just as a coach and a therapist. Sometimes couples need to have, you know, a check-in at the end of the week if we're really trying to work on building your communication skills. And sometimes couples, you know, I always say that, you know, you are talking about your relationship. I think that people often are having conversations about their relationships. And if you feel like you're having enough of these conversations throughout that, you know, having this very intentional check-in once a month, twice a month, once a quarter would be good. It's definitely up to you, and it's up to what you feel like is best going to benefit this conversation. Another thing is that this conversation come with a lot of nerves. It can feel very anxiety inducing, especially to bring up things that may not be working for you. It can feel very overwhelming to hear that you're not showing up the way that your partner needs you to. And my advice for that is to breathe through it, is to listen, to understand, not listen to debate or defend. Because if you're listening to them and you're already trying to come up with, well, but I have to do all the things, and that's why I keep leaving the socks on the floor. Now you're not listening about how these socks on the floor are really impacting your partner. You know, you're trying to defend yourself. So breathe through it, listen to understand, not to defend. And consider writing down what you want to say beforehand so you don't forget anything. Because again, this conversation can be very anxiety inducing, and it can come with a lot of nerves. And if you really want to make sure that you talk about how, you know, your love language isn't feeling acknowledged or seen, or you want to talk about how you really wish that your partner showed up for you in this way, or you want to talk about how in 2021 y'all going to Dubai and here's all the list of things that y'all can do and explore as one of your goals, there's no shame or no fault in just making sure that you have some notes so that way you can follow it in that regard. Questions about the check-in conversation? Okie dokie. All right. Oh, question. Would it ever make sense to check in with more than one partner at a time? Sure. So that's definitely a thing that you can do. So let's say as we explore this concept of polyamory, there's different structures and layers of polyamory that can exist. So there can be one partner. So there can be partner A who's in a relationship with partner B, and partner A is in a relationship with partner C. But partners B and C don't have any relationship with each other. So it may be useful if you're like exploring the goals of this for partner A to be like, hey, I want to have a check-in with both you, partner B and C. Get partners B and C's consent, especially like understanding that people feel different ways about their metamors. So a metamor is your partner's partner with whom you don't have a relationship with. So because partner A is dating person B and partner A is dating person C, partners B and C are metamors. Some people love their metamors. Some people don't like their metamors. Humans is humans. There's no right or wrong way to do that. But it's important for you as partner A not to just like invite both of these people without those people's like consent. Let's say that you're in a relationship dynamic where it's like partner A is dating partner B, is dating partner C, is dating partner A. You're in this triangle formation. So because all three of you are in this relationship together, it might make the most sense for all three of you to sit down and have this very intentional check-in. So definitely this can look the way that you need it to look and show up the way that you need it to show up based on how you're living your lifestyle or showing up in your orientation. Great question. Okay. The split conversation. This is the conversation that occurs at the end of a relationship. And I think that for a lot of people, this is the conversation that is the most difficult because there's a lot of feelings, there's a lot of experience that has occurred. And the easy thing to do is to like run away and block this person on all the socials and pretend like they don't exist. And I guess there could be an argument made for like ghosting, but you know, we are emotionally intelligent beings who can communicate. So let's go ahead and communicate. So some questions for yourself might be, what have you learned in this relationship? And that's one of the things when I think about what relationships are for. Like, not only does it provide you, you know, those intimacies and the love, the affection, the touch, the cuddles, the sex, but it also gives you the opportunity to see yourself reflected through another person. It also gives you the opportunity for you to have this other person who's affirming you or maybe helping illuminate some patterns for you. You can really sit back and say, yo, from being in this relationship with this person, I find that, you know, jealousy is a problem for me. Or I find that I really feel uncomfortable with discussing X, Y, and Z because blah, blah, blah. So really like sitting and reflecting on what you've learned. Another good thing is to like imagine what you want from yourself in the future. So if it's like, yo, I really enjoyed how caring and affectionate B was, like I really need my next partner to have that same level of care and affection, but that person had a really bad temper and I just can't be in another relationship where there's a bad temper. Even reflecting on how you want to feel in your next relationship. Yo, like I did not feel loved and seen and cared for in this relationship. And there were all these red flags about the lack of love and seeing and careness that I kind of just disregarded. So I know in my next relationship, if these same feelings of feeling unloved and uncared for come up, I immediately know that I want to listen to those feelings and I want to move differently because I don't want to perpetuate the same thing that has existed before. So when you have that split conversation, some things that you might want to know is like, so what have you learned in this relationship and expressing what you've learned? Talking about how you've grown as humans or as people from being in this relationship. Even sometimes wondering like, what are patterns that what are patterns that you've noticed from me that you feel like are really important for me to know? Or even like, you know, how did I show up for you in this regards, in that regards? And thinking about like what reflections are energized for you. So are there good moments that have come up that you want to be able to share? Like, yo, you know, the time we were in the cabin was a really good moment for me because I just really needed someone there and you were there, and I will always appreciate, you know, having you have been there in that opportunity. And even, you know, at times being like, yo, like I felt like I had to walk on eggshells all the time around you and that I couldn't breathe and that I couldn't thrive and exist. Like really having the opportunity just to reflect about what your experience has been in relationship with this person. Some things to keep in mind. The purpose of all the check-in conversations is low-key kind of to not be blindsided if this relationship comes to an end. So if you're having these check-ins and you're just noticing that like, yo, I really need this from you and I'm not getting it, and I keep asking it from you and I'm not getting it, when you come to the split conversation, you can be like, I feel like this relationship isn't working for me because I've asked you for this several times and I'm just not getting it. And I can't exist in a relationship without this thing. Because the thing that for a lot of people is they feel one way about their relationship and then their partners break up with them and they're left with this like, I didn't even see it coming. I don't even understand. And that's because there weren't check-in conversations occurring throughout the relationship. I oftentimes like to say, think about the split conversation as an exit interview, similar to what you might experience in a job, you know, and it kind of makes me laugh because I just did an exit interview and it was like, would you recommend this partner to other people? And it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, like, would you? So maybe, you know, not taking it like in that actuality kind of regard, but think of it as an exit interview. Also keep in mind that closure may not look or feel how you need. I even sometimes struggle with like, is the concept of closure real? Are you ever going to find or achieve closure from this other person? Or do you need to find that closure within yourself for yourself? And then also keeping in mind that, you know, sometimes the split conversation that you have is like, yo, this relationship isn't working. I'm not happy. You're not happy. And that you have to leave the conversation as that. And sometimes this relationship occurs long after the relationship has ended. You know, y'all run into each other at a conference and it's like, yo, now that your feelings have resolved, I think it might be a good time for us to like talk about the end of our relationship and how that impacted us and what we learned from it and all of that. And sometimes you might not get this conversation at all. And that's why it's really important to hold on to that closure does not come from another person. Closure comes from you and the work that you do for you and your ability to pack up and move on. And that brings me to the end of my slide. So are there questions on anything that I've gone over, or questions in general? Cool. So I'll hang out and let the chat box be open, but this is me, y'all. So Honestly Nay is my sexuality education consultation business. So I do lots of workshops like this on a variety of topics. I have lots of pre-recorded workshops so that way you're able to learn on your own schedule. When you feel like it, you can learn more about me and my therapeutic services and my sex positive collaborative if you go to honestlynay.com. All of my social media is at Honestly Nay. I do not have Facebook. Facebook is a hater and they've shut me down twice. So that doesn't exist anymore, but I do have the YouTube Honest Sex with Honestly Nay. If you're interested in looking for coaching, if you're outside of the state of Colorado, or even if you're inside the state of Colorado, or if you're looking for therapy specifically on the inside state of Colorado, please go to my website and find the connection to my therapeutic services. It looks like we've got a couple questions here. So if one of your partners, what boundaries would you feel is necessary if one of your partners didn't like your metamors? So I think that is an exploratory question for you, because how I would navigate it doesn't really help how you will navigate it. So some things to concern is how important is it for your partners to like each other? You know, is your vision of this style of relationship that all of you get along and you can all be around each other? Then that means that you need to be having those conversations and checking in with those people. I know several people in relationships where they can't stand their metas. And what that means for them is that, you know, they can be cordial. They could see each other out in the street. They can acknowledge that they both care about and love and support their mutual human, But that don't really mean that they have to participate in each other's lives. Some metamors are some of the best friends that you'll ever meet. And not only are they super thrilled that this other person is in their human's life, but they're super thrilled to have it in their life. So that boundary setting definitely looks the way that it's going to look for you. And that's some exploration that I would highly, highly encourage, especially if you have this vision of all of y'all being able to like live together or get along or have like group dates or whatever. Do you have any tips around communication and safety for folks who engage in E&M through hookups? Definitely. So if you are just looking for, I guess another thing that I would need to explore is like, what does hookup mean for you? But what's coming to mind is like if you're having sex with a person once and then not having sex with the person again, or if your relationship with this person is solely sex, is being able to say like, I just want to have sex with you. Like I only really want to interact with you between the hours of 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. Being able to say, have that pre-sex conversation of when was the last time you got tested, what did you get tested for, and what were your results, and being very specific and asking for clarification. Sometimes when people have a pre-sex conversation and they say, when was the last time you got tested, and they're like, last month, they leave the conversation there. Or they say, what did you get tested for, and they're like, everything. And then I always, just because I'm a Taurus and I'm stubborn, I'll be like, oh, so you got tested for color blindness? Like, I don't know how that's going to help us in this like sexual relationship. Like what STDs were you specifically tested for? And what were your results? Even asking about like prior sexual health history is important. Safety, I would always say, especially if you're like interested in stranger sex, is having a support person, whether that support person is like with you or having a person who knows that this is what you out in the streets doing. So they know if they don't hear from you by a certain time to be worried. And that means, having that support system that you're able to do, that you're able to have. It also means ultimately, we can have all these conversations, we can ask all these questions, but at the end of the day, your health is your responsibility. So taking care of you, paying attention to your body, paying attention to what your normal is, trusting your intuition and listening to your gut, are definitely some safety things that I would bring up surrounding hookups or engaging in one-night stands or stranger sex. Both very good questions. Cool. Well, that's all I have for you folks. If anything comes up for you after this, feel free to shoot me an email. And like I said, on my website, honestlynae.com, you can learn more about me. You can also find the pre-recorded webinars that I have. And I also do kinky things. So if you're interested in exploring that or buying products to be able to do your kinky things, you can find those on my website as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been really wonderful. I learned a lot. I hope everyone else learned a lot. Yeah, this was a really great presentation. I just wanted to invite everyone to attend our next Q Plus EDU session, which is tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. It's called LGBTQ plus immigration activism. So that should be a really great discussion. Dropping the link for that in the chat. And then I'm also going to send the link to our feedback form. We always love to hear from folks what they thought about any Q Plus EDU sessions they attended, including this one. So if you'd like to give feedback, the form is in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. This was totally wonderful, and I think is going to be super helpful for folks, even if they weren't here to ask questions in person. I think the recording is going to be very widely viewed. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah. All right, have a good one.
You too.